January 10, 1942. Bataan Peninsula, Philippines. Captain Arthur Wermuth is crawling through the Japanese-occupied town of Calaguaman carrying two 5-gallon drums of gasoline. Hundreds of enemy soldiers are sleeping in the huts around him. He spreads gasoline on the walls of the thatched-roof homes. He strikes a match. The town erupts in flames. Japanese soldiers pour into the streets, some of them on fire, screaming. Wermuth runs toward the bridge. Bullets tear through the air around him. One hits his leg. He keeps running. He plants explosives. He blows the bridge. And behind him, more than 300 Japanese soldiers are dead or dying. This is the story of the man the Japanese called the Ghost of Bataan. The man who hunted alone in the jungle every night for months. The man who was credited with 116 confirmed kills before he was finally shot in the chest and captured. And then survived 3 years as a prisoner of war, including 2 hellship bombings by his own side. Arthur William Wermuth was born in 1914 to a prominent Chicago family that later moved to a ranch in South Dakota. He grew up tough, working the ranch during summers, learning to shoot, learning to fight, learning the kind of rough independence that would later make him one of the most dangerous soldiers in the Pacific. He attended Northwestern Military and Naval Academy in Lake Geneva, Wisconsin, where he excelled at football. He was a natural athlete, strong, fast, aggressive, but his poor grades and what he called his old-fashioned Dutch temper prevented him from attending West Point. Instead, Wermuth earned an ROTC commission in 1936 while attending North Park University. He served in the infantry reserves as a second lieutenant in the Civilian Conservation Corps, stationed in Michigan. By 1940, he was desperate for active duty. He wrote to the War Department requesting assignment overseas. In January 1941, the Army sent him to the Philippines to train the Philippine Scouts. The Philippine Scouts were elite U.S. Army units composed primarily of Filipino enlisted men with American officers. They were not ordinary soldiers. They were specialists, expert marksmen, jungle warfare experts, trained to fight rebels in dense terrain, to slip through enemy lines undetected, to conduct devastating hit-and-run attacks. Wermuth fit right in. He spent the next year training with them, learning their tactics, mastering camouflage and jungle movement. On December 7, 1941, Japan attacked Pearl Harbor. The next day, Japanese forces invaded the Philippines. Wermuth was promoted to captain on December 19th and assigned to command Company D of the 57th Infantry Regiment, Philippine Scouts. He had 150 men under his command. Most were Filipino. A handful were American. All of them were about to face an entire Japanese division. On December 26, 1941, Wermuth received orders from Colonel George Clark. Take your company north. Dig in. Hold the line. Do not retreat. Fight to complete destruction if necessary. It was a suicide mission dressed up as a defensive position. The Japanese were pushing south from the northern coast of Luzon with overwhelming force. Wermuth's company was supposed to slow them down, buy time for the rest of the American and Filipino forces to retreat to Bataan Peninsula. For 10 days, Wermuth and his men fought. The Japanese attacked in waves, artillery, infantry, banzai charges. Wermuth's men held. They fought from trenches, from trees, from holes in the ground. They killed Japanese soldiers by the dozens, but the enemy kept coming, and Wermuth's company was being annihilated. By the time the order came to fall back, only 37 of his 150 men had survived. Wermuth blamed himself. He had been placed in an unwinnable situation, but that did not change the fact that he had lost over 100 men in 10 days. Men he had trained, men he knew by name, men who trusted him to lead them home. The guilt ate at him, and it changed him. He decided that if he was going to lose men, it would not be because he sent them into danger he would not face himself. From that moment forward, Arthur Wermuth stopped being a conventional officer. He became something else, a predator, a lone wolf, a ghost. By early January 1942, American and Filipino forces had retreated to Bataan Peninsula. It was a mountainous jungle region, roughly 20 miles long and 15 miles wide, perfect for defensive warfare. General Douglas MacArthur had ordered all troops to hold Bataan until reinforcements arrived from the United States. But those reinforcements were never coming. The Japanese had destroyed much of the Pacific Fleet at Pearl Harbor. The Philippines were cut off, surrounded, alone. The Japanese began their assault on Bataan on January 9, 1942. They attacked the Abuque Line, a defensive position stretching across the middle of the peninsula. The fighting was brutal, close-quarters combat in dense jungle, visibility 10 to 15 yards at best. Japanese snipers infiltrated behind American lines, hiding in trees, picking off officers and machine gunners. American forces needed a counter-sniper unit, someone who could hunt the hunters. On January 5, 1942, Wehrmacht organized a group of 185 Filipino soldiers into what became known as the Suicide Snipers. Their mission was to counter enemy infiltration behind American lines and to hunt Japanese snipers. But Wehrmacht had another idea. He was not content to wait for the Japanese to come to him. He wanted to go to them, deep behind enemy lines, where an American officer would be least expected, where the hunting would be the best. Every night, Wehrmacht grabbed his Thompson submachine gun, 2 Colt 45 1911 pistols holstered like a Western gunfighter, and a handful of grenades. He slipped past the front lines alone into Japanese-controlled territory. He moved through the jungle in complete darkness, listening, watching, waiting. He found enemy patrols. He shadowed them for miles. And when the moment was right, he struck. On one mission, Wehrmacht hid in the dense jungle as a Japanese patrol passed within feet of him. He waited until they were gone, then stood up and joined the back of the column in the darkness. He hunched low, blending in, following them for miles toward the American lines. When one Japanese soldier stumbled and made too much noise, Wehrmacht shushed him. The soldier never realized it was an American officer walking behind him. When the patrol neared the fortified positions of the Philippine scouts, Wehrmacht pulled the pin on a grenade, handed it to the soldier in front of him, and melted back into the jungle. The grenade exploded. The scouts opened fire. The entire patrol was wiped out. This became Wehrmacht's routine: sleep during the day, hunt at night, alone. The Japanese started calling him Bataan ni Yurei, the ghost of Bataan. American forces called him the one-man army. Let us know in the comments where you are watching this from. Are you in the United States, Germany, the United Kingdom, or somewhere else? We would love to know who is keeping these stories alive. By January 10th, the Japanese had pushed American forces south past the Abuque Line and captured the strategic town of Caliguaman. The town sat at an important junction, and the Japanese were using it as a staging area. Hundreds of soldiers, supplies, weapons, and a wooden bridge that allowed them to continue advancing south. American commanders knew they had to destroy that bridge, but the town was crawling with Japanese troops. Sending a platoon would be suicide. They needed one man, someone who could slip through enemy lines undetected, someone who did not care about the odds. Wehrmacht volunteered. The plan was simple. Wehrmacht would sneak into Caliguaman before dawn, set fire to the town, and then blow the bridge with a satchel charge of TNT. Filipino artillerymen would wait for the smoke from the fire to rise above the tree line. 5 minutes later, they would begin shelling the town. That 5-minute window was all the time Wehrmacht had to blow the bridge and escape. Wehrmacht set out just before dawn, carrying 2 5-gallon drums of gasoline and a satchel charge. He slipped past Japanese snipers, crept through the jungle, and entered Caliguaman from the north. The sun was rising. Most of the Japanese soldiers were still asleep in the huts of local villagers who had fled to the jungle. Wehrmacht moved through the town slowly, quietly, spreading gasoline against the walls of thatched-roof homes. He worked his way through the entire town from north to south, dousing huts filled with sleeping enemy soldiers. Then he struck a match. The fire spread instantly. Within seconds, the entire northern half of the town was ablaze. Japanese soldiers poured into the streets. Some were on fire, screaming, dying in the dirt. Others began searching for the intruder. Wormuth ran toward the bridge. He had 4 minutes. He turned down an alley. 3 Japanese soldiers blocked his path. They had not seen him yet. Wormuth froze. The shadows masked his presence, but he was running out of time. He glanced at his watch. 3 minutes. He started to raise his Thompson. Then the 3 soldiers moved away. Wormuth ran. He broke into the bright sunshine and sprinted toward the bridge in a desperate zigzag run. Bullets sprayed all around him. One hit his leg, drilling into his calf. He stumbled but did not stop. The first artillery shells began to rain down on Calaguaman. The explosions distracted the Japanese soldiers just long enough for Wormuth to reach the bridge, plant the charges, and detonate them. The bridge exploded. Wormuth crawled back through the jungle, dodging snipers, bleeding from his leg, until he reached friendly lines. Medics removed a small-caliber bullet from his calf. It had barely missed the bone. Wormuth's first Purple Heart. Behind him, beyond the burning ruins of the bridge, inside the smoldering ashes of Calaguaman, lay the blackened bodies of more than 300 Japanese soldiers. Other Filipino scouts started volunteering to go on missions with Wormuth. He refused. He did not want to lose any more men. He had already lost over 100 in the first 10 days of fighting. He was not going to lose more by taking them on suicide missions behind enemy lines. But one Filipino scout would not take no for an answer. His name was Sergeant Crispin Jacob. Everyone called him Jock. He was 6 feet 4 inches tall, weighed 220 pounds, and was described by Wormuth as a huge black native from Zamboanga, a southern Philippine island. Wormuth said Jock was half Filipino, half Oriental, and tough enough to kick his ass if he refused to let him come along. Jock became Wormuth's closest friend and most trusted companion. They hunted together. They fought together. And more than once, Jock saved Wormuth's life. On one mission, Wormuth and Jock were searching for a Japanese wiretap that was giving the enemy access to American communications. They moved through enemy-controlled jungle and muddy rice paddies for hours, searching in vain. On the way back to their own lines, Wormuth was moving down an overgrown trail when a hidden wire caught his foot. He tripped and fell into a camouflaged ditch. He landed directly in the lap of a Japanese soldier wearing headphones, monitoring Allied transmissions. Wormuth scrambled backward, drawing his revolver. The Japanese soldier reached for his own weapon. Wormuth was faster. He shot the man dead. Then, fascinated by the Japanese equipment in the hidden position, Wormuth stayed to examine it. He never saw the 2 other Japanese soldiers creeping up on him until they were almost on top of him. This time, Wormuth's draw was too slow. A Japanese bayonet pierced his arm, chipping bone, pinning him to the wall of the ditch. "Jock!" Wormuth yelled. "Japanese, 2 more down here." Jock raced to his commander's aid. He saw the 2 Japanese soldiers in hand-to-hand combat with Wormuth. He could not shoot without risking hitting his captain. So Jock used his massive size and strength to bludgeon one enemy with the butt of his rifle, then turned and shot the other. He removed the bayonet from Wormuth's arm, freed him, and carried him back to friendly lines. Wormuth's second Purple Heart. If you are enjoying this story and want more untold accounts from World War II prisoners of war, make sure to subscribe to the channel. We are bringing you stories that most history books never covered. Throughout February and March 1942, Wormuth, Jock, and the Suicide Sniper Unit continued their guerrilla campaign against the Japanese. Over the next 3 weeks, they were credited with over 500 enemy killed while losing 45 of their own men. The estimate was considered conservative. Wormuth personally was credited with 116 confirmed kills. A New York Times article published on February 16, 1942, called him America's #1 one-man army. Time magazine ran a story on February 23, 1942, titled One Man Blitz. The article detailed one of Wehrmacht's reconnaissance patrols. On one of his reconnaissance patrols, Captain Wehrmacht, from a foxhole, spotted a long line of Japanese crossing a ridge. "I worked them over with my Tommy gun," he said, "and got at least 30 like ducks in a Coney Island shooting gallery." Attracted by the shooting, 5 Filipino scouts rushed to the scene, helped Arthur Wehrmacht polish off 50 or 60 more of the enemy party. The stories made Wehrmacht one of the first American heroes of World War II. The American public was desperate for good news from the war zone. They were losing battles across the Pacific. They needed someone to believe in, someone who was winning. Wehrmacht gave them that, but it also made him one of Japan's most hated enemies. The Japanese placed a bounty on him, dead or alive. In late March 1942, American commanders called for volunteers for a near-suicide mission to recapture the vital heights of Mount Phuket. The mountain was strategic high ground. If the Americans could retake it, they could slow the Japanese advance. If they failed, they would die trying. Virtually every member of Wehrmacht's remaining command stepped forward. The mission took 36 hours. Wehrmacht's team moved slowly through the jungle, killing Japanese soldiers along the way. They were credited with 65 more enemy kills. During the trek, a hidden Japanese soldier rushed Wehrmacht with a bayonet. Wehrmacht slammed his fists into the man's face as they fell to the ground in a life-and-death struggle. The Japanese soldier slammed a knee into Wehrmacht's groin. Pain surged through his body, but Wehrmacht drew his knife and killed the man. When they reached Mount Phuket, they launched the attack. It failed. More than half of Wehrmacht's men were killed. It was a suicide mission, just as the commanders had warned. And for Wehrmacht, it was devastating. He had lost so many men. Again, a few days later, near An Yasen Point, Wehrmacht led his remaining snipers across a small stream fully exposed to machine gun fire from dug-in Japanese positions. He was out in front, leading from the front as always. He jerked the ring from a grenade with his teeth and lobbed it toward the enemy position. Then a bullet struck him in the left breast. The bullet chipped a rib and passed through his lung. Wehrmacht collapsed. His men carried him to an aid station where the bullet was removed. He was near death for days, hemorrhaging, weak, in agony. But slowly he began to heal. 10 days later, still weak, still oozing pus from the hole in his chest, Wehrmacht strapped his revolvers on his hips, slung his Thompson over his shoulder, and returned to the field against doctors' orders. He rejoined what remained of his fighters on Signal Hill between Mariveles and Bagek. But it was too late. On April 9, 1942, during the retreat down Trail 10 behind Mount Sumet, Wehrmacht slipped in the wet grass, tumbled down the jagged mountain, and was knocked unconscious when his head hit a rock. When he woke up, he was in Field Hospital No. 2, and the hospital was in Japanese hands. The ghost of Bataan had finally been captured. Wehrmacht was forced onto the Bataan Death March along with 70,000 other American and Filipino soldiers. 60 to 70 miles on foot, starvation rations, no water, no medical care. Japanese guards beat anyone who fell behind. They executed anyone who could not keep up. Thousands died on the march. But Wehrmacht, despite his injuries, despite the bullet wound in his chest that had nearly killed him days earlier, survived. The Japanese knew who he was, the ghost of Bataan, the one-man army. The man who had killed over 100 of their soldiers. The man they hated more than almost any other prisoner. They feared him. Even as a prisoner, even starving and wounded, they called him Wehrmacht the Lion. Wehrmacht was sent to Cabanatuan Prison Camp No. 1, then Lipa, then Bilibid, then back to Cabanatuan. For 2.5 years he survived the camps, starvation, disease, forced labor. Men died every day. But Wehrmacht survived. A fellow prisoner, Elliot Jr. Smelser, later recalled, "The first year of my captivity, I worked on building an airfield for the Japanese. Life was not bad because they were afraid of the major in charge. His name was Major Wehrmacht, and the Japanese called him Wehrmacht the Lion." In December 1944, Wehrmacht and 1,618 other prisoners were loaded onto the Japanese transport ship Oryoku Maru for transfer to labor camps in Japan. The ship was unmarked. The prisoners were crammed into the cargo hold with no ventilation, no food, and no water. Men began dying within hours. On December 15, 1944, American planes from the USS Hornet bombed the Oryoku Maru, unaware that Allied prisoners were aboard. The Japanese beached the vessel. 300 prisoners were killed in the bombing. Wehrmacht survived. He swam to shore at Olongapo. The Japanese rounded up the survivors and transported them to San Fernando in boxcars. 2 days after Christmas, more than 1,000 prisoners were crammed into 2 more ships, the Brazil Maru and Inura Maru. Wehrmacht was in the hold of the Inura Maru, which was filled with coal dust from its previous cargo. On December 31st, the ships reached Takao Harbor in Formosa, present-day Taiwan. The Japanese held there to celebrate the new year, leaving the prisoners crammed below with little food or water. On January 9, 1945, American planes from the USS Hornet attacked again. They dropped a bomb into the front hold of the Inura Maru, immediately killing half of the 500 Americans crammed inside. Nearly every man who was not killed, including Wehrmacht, was wounded by flying shrapnel. It was friendly fire, Wehrmacht's fourth Purple Heart. For 3 days the Japanese left the bodies where they fell. The surviving prisoners sat among the corpses in the dark, filthy hold, bleeding, dying, praying. Finally, on January 12th, the dead were removed and the surviving 890 prisoners were transferred to the Brazil Maru for the final leg of the journey to Japan. By the time they reached Moji, Japan, fewer than 500 prisoners had survived. Within 3 months, another 100 died of disease and wounds. Fewer than 400 lived to see the end of the war. In early 1945, the U.S. Army changed Wehrmacht's status from prisoner of war to killed in action. They believed the one-man army of Bataan was dead, but he was not. 5 days after Japan surrendered, an American officer stood before a large group of sick, starving, and wounded but now free prisoners. Names were called. Occasionally a feeble voice answered. More often silence. "Major Arthur Wehrmacht," the officer called out, expecting no response. Here came a weak voice from the crowd. Arthur Wehrmacht, the ghost of Bataan, stepped forward. His body weighed 103 pounds. He was emaciated, scarred by 4 combat wounds, and marked by the emotional scars that could not be seen or understood by anyone who had not endured what he had. But Arthur Wehrmacht was still alive. He credited his success in combat to the Filipino soldiers he had fought beside. In an interview after the war, he said, "90% of the credit for what I did was due to them. They're the best soldiers in the world. I just happened to be in the right place at the right time." Arthur Wehrmacht received the Distinguished Service Cross for his actions in January 1942 in the Philippines. He also received the Silver Star and 4 Purple Heart decorations. He survived one of the most brutal campaigns of World War II. He survived the Bataan Death March. He survived Japanese prison camps. He survived 2 hellship bombings by his own side. And when it was over, when he was finally home, he did not call himself a hero. He called himself a soldier who had done his duty.